I have to say that was an amazing setup for what we're going to be talking about next. I don't have any related disclosures, but I did want to take one moment to say that this is a difficult topic. And consistent with that topic, we're going to be addressing some very serious and potentially uncomfortable issues that might be very uncomfortable for you personally. And I just wanted to warn you about that, but I think it'll actually be very helpful. The other thing that I need to say is that consistent with this topic also, one of the important ways to deal with burnout is actually with humor. And so a little bit later on in the talk, I'm hoping to involve that with a little bit more of a lighthearted approach. And this is really embodied in something that happened this last year. Kirk Spencer was my mentor when I was a fellow. I would meet him every ASC. We'd get together, we'd talk about our families, we'd talk about our careers. Kirk is not with us anymore, and this is my first ASC without Kirk. He was an amazing person. He impacted many, many lives, and kind of consistent with the humor theme, he made the Echo Place a really fun environment to learn, whether it was ribbing people or actually doing different sort of things, asking fellows to name Broadway tunes or that sort of thing. But he actually ended his own life, and his family's been very, very interested in actually using this tragedy to move things forward. I think this is one of the things that we have to take very seriously when we're considering this issue of burnout. Well, what is burnout? Of course, we go to Google to find out about everything. There's a number of very different definitions. Of course, number 3 is the one that's important: physical and mental collapse caused by overwork or stress, high levels of professionalism that might result in burnout. But actually, I like number 1 as well, the reduction of a fuel or substance to nothing. And sometimes that's what exactly burnout feels like. Burnout has actually benefited a lot by being defined very early on in the 1980s by this Maslow Burnout Inventory. It's been the thing that a lot of studies actually use. And it has 3 different domains: emotional exhaustion, which is basically when you're feeling overextended; depersonalization, it involves unfeelingness and sense of personality and being impersonal in response to patients in particular; and then the sense of decreased personal accomplishment, questioning your own feelings of your competence and a sense that you don't have any achievement in work, particularly with people. Now, it's important to note that all of these are actually separate domains. There isn't you're not supposed to at least use it as a composite, and that it is a continuous variable. It's not something that you either are or not burned out, but of course in the studies, in order to study this, there has to be sort of an imposed sense of whether someone is actually burned out or not for definition. And that is actually what was done in this very recent Medscape national survey of 15,000 physicians. Now, this was a Medscape survey, meaning that the respondents were actually part of Medscape, so it's not exactly the most robust data. Nonetheless, it's 15,000 physicians. And it's found a number of very interesting things. This is very consistent with the history and other studies in burned out. Nearly half of us are reporting that. And then there's other issues of you just feel depressed, you think you're depressed, or have you been diagnosed with depression. It turns out that many of the people represented in our society are involved in this. Primary care tends to be higher on that rate than cardiology, anesthesiology, critical care, radiology. Women report this more so. And it's very interesting how severe is your burnout, this idea, again, of a continuous variable. A lot of people choose the middle things here, but note that those who rated 7, I'm really, really burned out, were much more prevalent than those who rated 1. Not burned out at all, doesn't affect me. There's another very recent and interesting study that actually did a statistical modeling to try to figure out how expensive this was, and they came up with this number of $2.6 to $6.3 billion per year. And why is that? Well, it's basically about turnover costs. People are actually leaving. People are retiring. There is a cost of reduced work hours, people seeing fewer patients, reading fewer echoes, but it seems to be mostly about people just leaving or changing or retiring. And to get this issue of suicide, that actually asked about this directly, 14% reported that they've had thoughts. 1% have actually attempted it in this sample. 80% said no, and 6% said they weren't going to answer. But put this in the context of the fact that 300 to 400 physicians take their own lives every year. That's a huge number when you consider our profession. And it exceeds the rate of the general public by a lot, up to 130% for women physicians. And actually, it's related to perceived major medical errors. You can see this is what we would expect. Going from A, excellent, to F, failing is that person's rating of their workplace safety. So obviously, more medical errors are going to be reported in the last 3 months than those that have a failing grade for safety. These are among those who are not burned out by the Maslick inventory. But look what happens when we show the people that actually are reporting burnout. It really changes the dynamic quite a bit. That burnout seems to be more related to this reporting of major medical errors than even the primary work grades of the safety environment. Now that's physicians, but you know what? We're not the only ones. The entire Echo Lab has a number of different healthcare professionals who are at risk for burnout, and there have unfortunately been fewer studies among the sonographer population, but there have been some that really have pushed our understanding of this quite a bit. In 2002, they looked at sonographers in Tennessee and found out, at least in this sample of 113, that a lot of them rated in that moderate category in each one of the domains of burnout. And if you looked at Australia and New Zealand in a more contemporary sample in 2010, the scores were actually much higher than what was seen in Tennessee in 2002. And if you just look at it, the percentages who actually rated as burned out in these different categories, they rate 98% emotional exhaustion, 89% depersonalization. These are very, very high numbers. And I don't think it's just because it's Australia and New Zealand. So why are so many health professionals burning out? And it's been suggested in the lay press, at least, that it is about paperwork, electronic as well as paperwork. And in fact, back from the Medscape survey, again, the same sort of thing. Too many bureaucratic tasks, especially charting and paperwork. And then, of course, number 3 here was the EHR that is causing burnout. It's interesting because in some of the literature on sonographers, they came up, I think that's true for sonographers as well, but I think they came up with some interesting other rationales for it. Lots of overtime has been related to burnout. And also, even more interesting to me is that when sonographers are spending less than 10% of their time training students, that this actually led to burnout. So there's all these different things that actually are contributing to burnout, and there's probably many more, but a lot of these are samples of what you actually see in the literature that have been correlated with it over time. And they actually then lead to a number of things that actually can really impair our care of patients. And that includes low work satisfaction, reduced productivity, early retirement, higher job turnover. It's interesting that lower patient satisfaction in some studies is actually not true. It turns out that some patients actually really appreciate when the doctors are working overtime, and there's higher patient satisfaction that is correlated with physician burnout. But the other thing I really want to emphasize is it's not just about these sort of professional issues. It is also about what's going on outside the hospital and clinic setting. We all have home life challenges. We have interpersonal relationships, and these can lead to burnout, really apart from what's going on at work. Depression and substance abuse obviously plays a major role in it, and all of 3 of these things work out in a triangle. The other thing as I was thinking about this is that a lot of this is about unmet and disappointed expectations, and I'm not going to read all of these, but perhaps you can relate to some of these at some point during your work life, where you just weren't expecting things to be as bad or as different as you thought that they would be, or perhaps you were intentionally led to believe something that didn't actually turn out to be the case. And these include things at home as well. How could she leave me? Where did all the money go? And of course, we have the opportunity at work to sometimes pick up on some of the factors that are showing us that our colleagues are at risk for suicide or that we ourselves are at risk for suicide. Difficult behavior, withdrawn, decreased performance, impulsiveness, mood changes, poor judgment, workaholism, especially if there's been a change in any of these actual parameters in ourselves or in someone else. This is the time to be honest and to actually seek intervention. So how do we prevent and treat burnout? This is where we're going to change gears just a little bit to warn you, because as I was thinking about this and doing some research on it, I realized that I didn't really want to just regurgitate the traditional and somewhat pedantic old sort of things that you read about all the time. I don't know if you're like me, but I get an email every week from the University of Washington Wellness Center that is telling me about opportunities for me to be well and mindful. And I didn't want to just do that. I thought that we should go really beyond that. So I actually went to the highest human authority that I could think of that could help me with this question. I asked our outgoing president, Jonathan Lindner. I said, Jonathan, I need you to send me everything you have on preventing burnout. You know, what do you do at Oregon Health Sciences University to really address this issue? So I eagerly awaited his return email, and it actually came back relatively quickly, and it consisted of a single file. Dr. Linder's solution. So I went back to the traditional, pedantic, other things, and really these are some of the things that are in the literature and again, in the emails that I get every week. Resiliency, and resiliency is more than just suck it up and quit complaining. This is really about a positive outlook, a way of going past that. Yoga, meditation, of course, massages, exercise, healthy eating, time with loved ones, counseling, art. And I did want to point out, actually, that after the scientific sessions tomorrow, if you really hurry quickly, you can make this puppet-making party up in Seattle. But there's another sort of thing here that might actually be helpful. Empowerment in the work, reduction of workplace chaos and workplace social events. And I would actually add in my favorite, which is never going to happen, is killing off the electronic medical record. So this is one of the things that we have attempted to, really bring some of these things and use the things, the things that we have at work to actually help people to deal with it. And it has had variable success, of course, but it's the beautiful thing about echo is that you can actually get a nice whooshing sound when you're listening to your aortas. But really, above everything else, you really need to look at your local environment, figure out what the important thing is, utilize your sort of resources, and really consistent with that in Seattle, by far and away our most important way of dealing with burnout is coffee. And actually, when I first arrived there, the first thing I did was got all of the attendings together, and we purchased a coffee maker for the lab so that we could improve morale and avoid burnout. Now, I want to show you, though, that sometimes your best laid plans can go awry and things may not happen. And we've actually produced a video to illustrate this from the University of Washington Ecolab Theater Troupe, but I always have trouble at national meetings with the audio. It never, ever works. So I think I've actually solved that problem with this. Maybe not, it's working. So that actually didn't help our burnout problem. These solutions can have unintended consequences, and they really don't work for everyone. It's actually been said about burnout that it's the canary in the coal mine. It's the first thing that actually goes. But we have to remember, we can teach the canary in a coal mine to meditate, but it's still going to die. And I think we have to really come up with something that's a little bit better for our patients and ourselves. So one thing is we can really separate these two solutions into two separate things. And actually there's been a meta-analysis that looked at all the studies involving organizational changes, which we mentioned, and then the more personal mindfulness things. And the bottom line is they both work, but the organizational changes seem to work better. And I think we have to remember that. And one of the organizational changes that's been very important for us was hiring more people. We've got MAs now who are rooming the patients. We have lots of people at the front desk who are actually doing a great job. We have somebody who's making sure that I'm filling out my billing statements correctly. And of course, we have nurses and EKG techs and everyone else. It's all part of the team, and they're vitally important. Now, there are some downsides to this. You know, all of this is great, but we have to remember we don't want to just pass along the burnout. You're going to do the job that I don't want to do. We don't want to create a sense of entitlement or diffuse responsibility, and people are just not cars. We can't make this an assembly line. Of course, we have AI coming. I'm looking forward to not having to do a lot of measuring. I think that'll help a lot. There's been a number of things from the AMA and others, again, looking at this as a system, organizational approach, not just more meditation classes. And of course, we need to keep in mind the suicide prevention, looking at proactively, and the most important thing is talking about it and normalizing self-care. I had a few other thoughts. Just please be collegial in this. We should all be willing to do whatever it takes. We need to identify and manage expectations, and the golden rule is not a bad thing in the workplace. It might actually help a little bit. But remember, not everybody's like you. You got to do what you think they would want done. In the end, and I think this is what ASC Cares is all about. This is a great quote from a recent article. What all of these features of the current health system contributing to burnout have in common is their detraction from and disruption of nurturing, satisfying, supportive, and caring relationships with patients and colleagues. And that's what ASC Cares, and I think what all of us have to keep in mind and begin to address. So thanks very much for your attention.